And I got a ton of responses.
Wow.
Like something insane, like 15 to 20% positive responses out of those emails.
My guest today is Bennaceur, CEO and co-founder of Attention, a company that uses AI to help sales teams close more deals. Anis was an early employee at Tinder, where he was part of the team that drove their meteoric rise through growth hacking and experimentation. Anis then took what he learned at Tinder and launched his first startup, Mixer, a professional network like LinkedIn, but for artists, musicians, filmmakers, and creative professionals. After a successful exit at Mixer, Anis is well on his way to repeating his success at his current company, Attention. They're one of the world's fastest growing startups, having gone from $0 to $2 million in annual recurring revenue in just 14 months. In this episode, we talk about the specifics around how Anis and his team actually run experiments that you could apply in your business, some of the shockingly effective experiments that drove Attention's hypergrowth, what he's focused on learning now, and a lot more.
I'm super excited to chat, because we've been working together for, what is it now? Over a year, I think.
Yeah.
You're a busy man, so it's rare that I get a chance to just pick your brain. I think you're one of the only people who, when a 9 p.m. Slack message comes in that says, hey, you have a few minutes for a Zoom, that I will jump out of bed, open up my computer, and get into it. Because anytime that I have gotten on one of those 9 p.m. Zoom calls with you, I walk away like with some new kind of way of thinking about something, or like growth hack or technique. So yeah, it's just really cool to have you here. Learning to scale is the idea.
That's great to hear. Always happy to share learnings and also learn from other people as well, like you guys. So
appreciate it. One thing I'm curious about, I was listening to a lot of all the podcasts that you've done that I could find, and obviously we've talked a lot over the past year. And one thing that I thought was interesting is that you talk about how you found programming as a kid and you taught yourself how to code. And then you went into business school and found your way into investment banking.
yeah.
And I'm curious how did you get onto that path? And why did you end up going into IB instead of, let's say, like going straight into a tech job?
So first of all, I taught myself how to code because when I was a kid and my parents bought me a computer, the first thing that I thought was not how do I use this, but actually how can I build this myself, right? And then the next thing that I wanted to learn was I was seeing all these softwares and websites, and I was thinking to myself, how can I build this software? Or how can I create this website? And the easiest thing that I found online using tutorials was learning HTML. So from there, I learned HTML by myself, then JavaScript, and then CSS. And I was just obsessed, and then PHP, and then Visual Basic, and then C++, and all by myself. And I was just obsessed with that, right? That impacted just my grades at school in two ways. I just wanted to learn the things that would help me be a better programmer. So I was really good at math, but I couldn't care less about physics. So I had really bad grades in physics. And so in France, if you want to go to what they call classe préparatoire, which is like the elite preparation for the top schools, you have two tracks. Either you're really good in math and physics, so you go throughout the scientific studies, or you're really good in math and history. And I just happened to be really good in history completely randomly. And so you go through what they call prépa HEC, which is prépa for business studies. Because of my terrible physics grades, I ended up choosing that path. So I went to one of the best business schools in Europe, and at the time, it was early 2000s. Everyone was just obsessed with investment banking. It was the thing that everyone in our classes would just talk about. And tech in France wasn't such a big thing. And at the time, I had stopped programming, because when you go through prépa, all you have to focus on is just getting the best possible, being the best at what you do so that you get to the best schools. So I didn't have time to do anything else that included my hobbies. Mm-hmm. I hadn't been programming for a while, and so from business school there, I just decided to do what most people were saying was like the royal path for your career, which happened to be investment banking, right? It was like either you went to investment banking or management consulting, like McKinsey, Bain, BCG, And so that kind of was the royal path to be able to do whatever you wanted to do next. That's like the long story of how I ended up doing investment banking. And one day, a friend of mine who was very close with the founders of Tinder when that startup was still very young offered me to join him and start working with him. So I just jumped ships, and that moved me towards doing tech.
And what was the job at Tinder in the early days?
Yeah, I was doing growth for them in France, but it was not technical at all, actually.
Okay.
It was a big risk, right? You take like this bet on a 6-month-old startup that no one had heard of in Europe. And you just go around, go to different campuses and schools and universities and make sure that everyone signs up for that app, sponsoring their school events and the campus events. And really the way Tinder grew back in 2013 was through a lot of events, right? Nothing of that was very technical. And that's like how you go from 0 to a few hundred and then thousands of users very quickly.
How many employees were there at Tinder at that time?
Their HQ was in LA, and my friend and I were directly working with the founders at the time. So I would say, give or take, 50 to 100 people.
Pretty small.
Exactly.
I'm fascinated by this because it's like you're someone who strikes me as an early adopter, right? And like you were obviously, that's really like early on the growth curve to get into Tinder. And then now again with attention, right? Like you were really early on this adoption curve. And I'm curious how much of that is a thought process or a systematic way of thinking or looking at it and zooming out and thinking, or is it just this seems like a good opportunity? How can you tell when you're an early adopter, I guess is the question.
I think there's a mad scientist side of things, which is you love running experiments. I've always loved running like random experiments. At the end of the day, it's going back to first principles and thinking, in my rebellious ways, I don't want to do what everyone else does. Even though I went through banking pretty early on, I would say that I've always been thinking, this is what most people say. Maybe a lot of these people might be wrong because they just keep building a hypothesis on things that they assumed is true. And as a matter of fact, if you run your own experiments, you might come down to a different conclusion or a secret learning that no one has ever thought of, right? So myself, just ever since I was a kid, I always wanted to do any sorts of experiments, right? That experimentation side of me just always made me want to explore a million different things. And I could immediately see the minute I had the Tinder app in my hand, how addictive it was to swipe left.
Right.
And I thought it was very fun. And in a way, I didn't think about it twice, right? I thought that the app was very addictive. I had the chance to work with a friend of mine who I valued a lot and thought was brilliant. And I thought that the founders of Tinder were onto something. And they had early traction in LA at the time. That's the thing, right? No one had heard about it in France. But then what would happen, the next step for me was showing the app to a few other people around me. And they were like, oh, that sounds very fun. And just like seeing them like play with it.
That's interesting.
Like you get some
like mini customer research almost.
Exactly.
That's
but
cool.
I wasn't as structured at the time. Just like a gut feeling.
What was the leap then to come to the States?
Yeah, over time, the impact that I was having on the growth of Tinder was more and more limited because obviously we had a lot of impact in the earlier days, getting the word out, getting most people to sign up. But then the app itself was viral, and I wasn't learning as much. All of the kind of growth hacking was centralized in the US. At the same time, noticing firsthand how successful those founders were, I thought, hey, I've seen this. Maybe I could do it myself. My mom used to always tell me, hey, you're born in the US, you have American citizenship, you should actually just move to the US and work there. At the time, I thought that it was time for me to just move out of Paris, move to somewhere in the US, and I had chosen New York because that was, for me, the most European American city. And so I moved to New York, took a first job at a company for a couple of months so that I could pay my rent, pay the bills, but at the same time, I was starting to work on starting a new startup. And so what happened was Cody Simons, who was my co-founder at Bennaceur, reached out to me, said, hey, super impressive background, noticed that you were doing early growth at Tinder, would love to chat with you. Him and I had a first chat, a second chat, and then a third chat. And he wanted to build a dating app, and I convinced him to do something else. And eventually we ended up going to build a professional network for creatives. I thought that there was a massive opportunity there, but we were a bit too early, right? The creator economy kind of blew up in 2018, 2019, and I think I was there a little, again, a little too early, a little bit too much of an early adopter and innovator. But kind of the thought process was like, look, you're a creator today, you don't know where to kind of showcase your work. You had networks like Behance, but that was about it. And you couldn't really network with other people the best possible way. And Instagram was just an app that allowed you to post photos, but not really to communicate or structure kind of your portfolios of work the right way. We had some angel funding. You could kind of call it a bootstrap startup. And we built an app that was very much top-down, a vetted network for creatives. We would just make sure that we had the top creatives to join the platform, people in film, music, fashion, art. And very early on, it took off. I just redid all the same things that I did over at Tinder, which was running some events, inviting the right people, and making sure that if you wanted to come to the event, you had to be signed up on our app. And so the first thing is, okay, you sign up on the app. To get the address of the event, you had to be vetted and accepted. And once you got the address, you could forward the invite to a few other people. You forwarded the invite, other people got the invite, they had to sign up, etc. And so it went viral very quickly with a really good early network. And that way we had our first thousands of users who are all top creatives in New York and LA. And that was like the early story of Mixer.
I have so many questions. Like moving to the most expensive city, or one of the most expensive cities on earth, to bootstrap a startup, that just sounds painful. But I'm curious, that seems like such a daunting cohort to get into. You know what I mean? Like in B2B, I can wrap my head around how you go approach a VP of sales and we get a meeting booked. But famous people, you're this kid fresh into New York City from Paris. I don't know, maybe you had acting school friends or something like that, but it must have been pretty sought after people. How did you even get them to entertain the conversation?
Yeah, actually, I ended up partnering with two people who were extremely helpful. The first one was Alex Karapitas, who is the drummer of Julian Casablancas and The Voids. Julian Casablancas being the lead singer of The Strokes. Mm-hmm. He had another band called The Voids, and Alex was the drummer of The Voids, who had an incredible network. And then Andre Saraiva, who is a nightlife entrepreneur who created Le Baron and knew really every single creative that you could think of. So those guys really invited a lot of people for us. So that really helped us a ton. And we gave them equity into the company.
How did you get the first meeting with those guys, though?
I met Alex in Paris when he was touring with The Voids, and I had reached out to him completely randomly on Facebook at the time and told him, hey, I saw that you guys are touring in Paris. How about we throw you an after party? You can DJ there, and I'll pay you. And so then I reached out to Le Baron in Paris.
Was this when you were in IB?
It was when I was at Tinder.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I would have not had the time. And so what happened was Alex responds to me and he says, yeah, let's do it. I ended up getting invited to that show in backstage, which was really cool. We threw that after party together. We had that band come. I invited a ton of people that I knew back in Paris. We had a great night, and I stayed in contact with Alex. And then when I moved to New York, he was one of the first people I thought about reaching out to after I had these first conversations with Cody. And I was like, hey, let's actually try to involve this guy. He knows a ton of people. He was living in New York. He has a massive network in the creative space. And he also knows Andre very well, the owner of the Baron, who I didn't actually know, even though I threw an after party at his club. And after I spoke with Alex, he said, hey, I can definitely also get Andre involved in this thing. He lives between New York, LA, and Paris. He knows everyone. Let's definitely get him in. And so he sends a text to Andre. He connects us. Andre and I end up having lunch actually at San Ambrose, Soho. I share my ideas with him, and Andre's on board after a 45-minute launch.
Nice.
And so that was the beginning of Mixer. Yeah.
That's cool. Do you hang out more in tech circles, or are your friends more in the creative circles?
I would say that 75% now is tech. It's just, if you asked me that question 6-7 years ago, it would have been the total opposite.
Yeah. What was the leap then from you had a social network for creatives to then starting
Attention.
Attention?
Yeah, the way I defined everything that I've been doing was how do I take anything that I know and learn the closest, most adjacent thing, right? My background over at Tinder was getting just people to sign up on a consumer app. And then I knew how to do that. I applied it at Mixer. And then the next thing was, how do we start making revenue out of this? So we started selling user subscriptions, $10 a month to be part of the platform. So that's how we started making revenue. And then the next thing that we realized was that we had high churn on the consumer side of the subscriptions. So how about we built on top of this a job marketplace where brands could hire these creatives based on what they needed, right? I need a copywriter, but a really good copywriter, or a really good art director. And instead of just going on Fiverr or any of these cheaper job marketplaces, I go on something that is qualitative. And so then from there, what happened was we built this job marketplace. I hired the head of sales, and we started just selling subscriptions to companies that included Capital One, Square, Havas Media, Cartier, etc. I learned a lot about B2B sales at that point. And I was just seeing all the challenges, all the bottlenecks, all the issues of selling B2B, especially when you're selling a nice-to-have product to a function that does not have that much of a budget in a very limited TAM, which was our case, right? It makes it very hard to actually sell, and you want to maximize conversion rates, right? You don't want to lose any of those at-bats.
Right.
You don't want to mess up any of those deals. During the pandemic, when everyone moved on Zoom, I kept thinking there might be a way we could just record these conversations, because I was no longer next to my head of sales seeing the conversations happening. There might be a way to record the conversations, get the transcript, and figure out a way to give him real-time tips, things to say during the conversation. Also, our sales force was always empty, so I could never see what was happening in those deals and how they were progressing. Right. So I figured there might be a way to be able to do that too, right? All these kind of like challenges made me think that there was something that could be done, while also in July 2020, of 2020, GPT-3 comes out, and I see this, and it was the biggest excitement that I had in a while. I thought that was incredible, and I started digging into it. Same time, that same summer, I meet my current co-founder, Matthias, who happened to be my biggest competitor when I was running Mixer. Matthias was actually the CTO and co-founder of Swipecast.
Okay.
He was also exploring around AI, but not directly related to sales, but actually computer vision, right? Creating AI models, AI female models, which is a huge market today for e-commerce brands. We grabbed coffee during that summer. We exchanged thoughts. I like that guy a lot, and I was thinking to myself, I might want to start a company with this guy. 6 or 9 months later, I reached back to him with this idea that I had around solving sales problems using AI, and we kept exchanging thoughts for a few months, testing out each other, and then realizing that we would definitely want to start our next startup together. And attention came from there. September 2021, Matthias and I had started Attention together and started building our MVP.
What do you look for in a co-founder?
A lot of people will say I have a grid of things or boxes that I want to check. I think on my end, it was a lot more of a gut feeling. There was nothing that really seemed like a red flag when we spoke to one another, right? Everything that he said made sense to me, and everything that I said made sense to him. And not just sense, but complete sense, right?
Like a philosophical alignment.
Exactly. We both believed in working very hard. We both had huge ambitions. We both were burnt out of, building in smaller spaces. We both wanted something different out of our lives, right? We didn't want to do anything cool anymore. We wanted to do something that was helpful to businesses.
Okay.
And that had a huge potential.
Did you just see more opportunity in B2B from like a TAM perspective?
Yeah, absolutely.
That
Right.
that was like the thing that drove you there?
100%. It's like the difference between a tiny market, maybe an actual TAM of under $100 million versus a real TAM of $100 billion. That, and also just we were both in our early 30s. We wanted to do something that was very intellectually stimulating.
Of course, it makes sense. B2B, you have a huge TAM, but you could also have probably found some large TAM consumer product. What was it that made you approach it that way or think about it that way?
I think it was towards the end of my tenure at Mixer that just I was doing mostly B2B instead of B2C.
Okay.
And like the evolution, and I think one of our partners over at ENIAC, who led our seed round, said that he tends to see a lot of founders first starting their first startup in the consumer space and then evolving into the B2B space, right? And for me, it was just like that evolution of going from consumer to actually laying a wrapper of B2B and then actually thinking to myself that I would do B2B for my next startup.
Okay.
It was just like where my mind was going, and then also just the challenges that I had over at Mixer just with B2B sales that I wanted to solve. I was just like testing things left and right and again experimenting and realizing that I could have started a startup out of these kind of experiments that I was running.
So it sounds like more of a natural evolution than a really discrete decision or turning point.
Exactly, correct.
I think I saw you described as a world-class growth hacker. And as someone that's seen you work, I would tend to agree. I'm curious, what's your favorite experiment you've ever run? Either in terms of something that had huge impact or maybe just something that was like a pretty funny story.
I remember once this one VC reaches out to me with a very personalized email about how great was the outcome of attention on sales reps, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, it is crazy that this VC just sent me such a personalized email because, as everyone knows, associates reach out to thousands of founders. And I ended up taking the meeting just because I wanted to learn more about the email. And I talked to the associate and I say, hey, did you write that email with AI? And she was like, oh my God, no, I just wrote it myself. I was like, that's interesting. And that kind of gave me the idea that you could, if you took the right types of inputs from a LinkedIn profile or scraping a company's website, you could actually write really good emails with AI. Now, bear in mind, this was in 2021 when no one was doing that. So I wrote some lines of Python, plugged it to the OpenAI API, plugged it to my scraper, built my own scrapers, and then reached out to 8,000 companies with very personalized emails using AI, or what seemed like very personalized emails using AI at the time.
8,000 companies?
1,000.
Oh, 1,000.
Yeah.
Okay.
1,000. And then...
It's like, damn, that's a big experiment.
And I got a ton of responses.
Wow.
Like something insane. I think it was around 15 to 20% positive responses out of those emails. And people were like, this is such a good email. It was incredible because everyone is getting 2-3% response rates because everyone knows what emails are personalized versus which ones are not being personalized. And that one actually worked out really well. And I was like, holy shit, there could be something. You could create a new business out of this. And I remember showing this to David Barron at the time, who was the global director of sales over at HubSpot. And he looked at the results and told me, yeah, you could definitely build a startup out of this. And funnily enough, I think 9 months later, you would start seeing the first cohorts of startups coming out of YC that were doing things like that.
Those like AI sales agents and stuff like that.
And now it's a huge market.
Have you ever had a growth experiment just blow up in your face?
Yeah, I think you need to think that 70% of your experiments are not going to be successful.
Yeah.
And that you should be fine with that. So I would say that at one point, very early on also when doing outbound, instead of sending emails to professional emails, we did an experiment where we sent those emails to personal emails.
I bet people got mad.
People really hated it.
Oh.
I remember reading all the responses. I didn't have a great day that day.
Oh man, internalizing the negative feedback. One thing I'm curious how you think about, because AI, I feel like in a lot of ways, it's like just pouring gasoline on the fire of how fast you can iterate on things. And with stuff like writing these AI emails, I feel like there's a quality to this in this space where it's efficient market hypothesis in finance. Like once everybody knows the information, then the jig's kind of up, and the effectiveness of those new things just plummets after people catch on. How do you think about keeping that iteration velocity high, and just how do you have the ideas to keep doing the experiments to make sure that you're ahead of the curve on that?
Yeah, it's definitely being ahead of the curve, as you said, right?
Yeah.
Again, that comes down to putting a lot of thought about this, right? Thinking about this day and night and having shower thoughts and not having any experiments be top down, like, hey, I'm going to write an email to everyone and put in some variables, but actually, how do I go into every single profile, try and find something really interesting about them, and then customizing my email to them in a manual way, writing something that resonates, and then saving that experiment or that email in a way that you're going to build decision trees in the future, right? So I'll give you an example. Let's say I see someone's profile today. I see that somewhere on his LinkedIn it says that he just recently migrated from HubSpot to Salesforce, that he just adopted Medpic as a framework for his sales reps, and that he was in his new job in the last 90 days, right? And I'm going to write an email that is very personalized, that is going to say, hey, I saw that you just recently migrated your HubSpot to Salesforce, that you, in your first 90 days, congrats. And then it seems like you're big on Medic. We can definitely help you with, or how are you measuring adoption across your reps? Would love to see if we can help, right? I know for a fact that this email is most likely going to be responded to because it is relevant. I'm not mentioning anything related to the city he lives in or the school they went to, just very pure information about what's top of mind for that person. The minute that person responds to that email, I'm going to save the email that I wrote and the triggers that made me write that email in a folder. I'll end up having, let's say, 100 different emails, and I'll be putting them in categories. Those categories will allow me to build a decision tree where I say, all right, if this person has a profile that is going to mention a Salesforce migration and or is in their new role in the first 90 days and or adopted a new framework, I can take all these different elements, put them into a very well-written email with AI, and that at that point is going to yield into high response rates.
So you're
it's
doing
really
it
bottoms up.
doing it manually the first time.
Exactly. And I make my team just write very manual emails, save in a specific folder all the ones that had a response, and from there we can actually build that decision tree that will get us the best possible responses versus doing it top down, which will not be as successful.
Top down being like starting with the big list.
If you're only doing things at the top down level, you're just going to be floating at the ideal level, right? And the ideal level will never get you to have anything that is interesting or groundbreaking, and you're just competing with everyone else at the ideal level. And as Peter Thiel says, competition is for losers. So you really want to go bottoms up, try to make your own discoveries, find out your own secrets, and then actually scale out those secrets.
It's really interesting. How do you handle the organization of that specifically? Is it inside of like a Notion or something, or is it in Google Drive? How do you keep track of all these things and then make sure that everyone's aware, like when someone responds to email 742B?
Yeah, I ask, so my BDRs are doing this and they're keeping track of it, and they're actually saving all the emails in a Google Drive.
So do you encourage them to have some specific amount of time, hey, spend 2 hours every day trying to come up with random trigger ideas or doing research, or is it more hunter-gatherer, like in their prospecting they're doing this, or what? How do you create that it sounds like you're creating a culture around that experimentation at Attention.
Yeah, very simply, in their first weeks, the BDR was starting to send out automated sequences, and pardon my French, I lost my shit. You cannot do that. Stop, cut off all of this stuff. You're going to just send very manual emails. They're like, yeah, but how am I going to hit my numbers? I'm like, I don't care. You're just going to get as many positive responses sending out manual emails versus these automated sequences. So just go back to the drawing board. Your first months are just ramp up anyway, so you're not expected to hit full quota. Just learn, figure out what works in a manual way, and then we can start scaling things. So it's not about spending, they organize their time however they want, right? They have full liberty to figure out when they send emails versus when they cold call. But I did not want them for the first month or two to send anything automated.
That makes sense. If we look at the sort of, and I'm sure there's a lot of variability, and I'm sure you test all kinds of different emails and that, but if we broke down a cold email to the component parts, and let's just say it's two parts, there's like a trigger, an observation, or a business case, and that's one thing. And then there's CTA. There's something that you ask for, or the response. Do you hold the CTA fairly constant when you're doing these things, or are you constantly moving both parts? You know what I mean? From standardizing the experiment perspective.
I like to say just experiment with anything. Some more rigorous people tell you keep that constant, and then once you figure out what works at the beginning, then maybe A/B test it. Just test whatever you want. I think that if the first part of the email really resonates, the last part won't actually break your email.
Right.
It's just like how you're getting that person's attention. One of my best sequences of emails was not even personalized. It was just saying, hey, I know that you've been checking our website lately. I'm the founder and CEO of Attention. It would be great to connect. Do you have any time in the next X days? And it just sounded very authentic, very genuine. At the end of the day, it's just try to think, what is everyone trying to do? And just do the complete opposite.
That's funny. Yeah, I remember when I was trying to figure out cold email, which was when I joined Alex at Opiscope, probably the first 9 months, I did nothing but just send cold emails all day long. And I certainly didn't have as clever of an experimentation approach. But I remember seeing something about how you have to make it not sound like a sales email. And then the contrarian in me was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make a sequence. And the first email is going to be subject line, this is a sales email. And that was the turning point for me, where I had then started to get these responses. You just try this weird stuff and sometimes it works.
100%. I think that Jake from my team actually sent this one email saying in the subject line something like cold email from a sore loser BDR or something like that. and the guy actually responded, right? And he ended up making that a post and that went viral. Everyone loved it, right? Just try to be original. People are just stressed out all day, every day. Try to be fun, try to be playful. And I think more importantly, don't try to bullshit your buyer, right? That's going to set up a very bad standard for your relationship. Just, I would get sometimes these automated emails where you see a fake message from one person at a company to the other person saying, hey, you should reach out to Anis. And then the person tells me, hey, my co-founder said that I should reach out to you because of XYZ. No,
so played out.
That conversation did not happen internally. I know that you were trying to lie to me, and so I'm going to just send you to spam because you're trying to trick me. I think just try to not be disingenuous in your approach.
This might be a little bit of a direction change, but as you're building this AI product, how different is it building something in the AI space versus Mixer? This environment feels like the ground is shifting so fast that with things like the models are evolving super quickly and all that. What does the thought process look like internally in terms of like when you're thinking about, okay, what features do we build? Where do we focus? How do you think about that?
I think, first of all, like going back to first principles, we only build things that our customers really need and things that are a painkiller for our customers, right? Really build things that we know are going to be a home run based on our just daily conversations with our users. From there, what happens is once we validated our assumptions, our hypotheses, and how things are going to be helpful for our customers, we then start to think in terms of infrastructure, how do we build the best possible infra so that in case there's a new model coming out or different models that are actually yielding better results, you're just able to switch them instead of having to just completely rewrite everything. And for OpenAI, at the end of the day, it's an API call when you're using GPT-3 versus GPT-4. But there are some nuances where you have to change certain things if you're not doing it the right way. So it does require your machine learning engineers to just build things in a way that's interchangeable. And as Sam Altman was saying in his recent podcast interview with 20VC, he was saying, look, there are two ways about building at the application layer. Either you assume that things are always going to stay the same, or you assume that the AI models keep getting better and better. And if you build in the first assumption, then we're going to steamroll you. So you should always build in the latter assumption, which is the models will just keep improving. So just build your product, invest the right amount of time in your machine learning infrastructure so that you can interchangeably replace models without having to completely rewrite everything.
Would it be fair to say that like the defensibility then comes more from the insight? And you were talking about speaking with customers and solving a pain point as opposed to the thing you're doing, or?
Yeah, I think a year ago, every VC was saying, hey, but you're just building a wrapper on top of GPT. And that was such a toxic way of thinking, right? Yeah. Building these wrappers will allow you to actually structure the output from the data that you're getting the right way so that you can actually build something that is going to be defensible in the future.
That makes sense.
This might be a bit vague or abstract, but if I got a little too concrete, I might give away some of the secrets behind our defensibility. But the way you're getting defensible is by scaffolding as many different pieces together for your clients to serve them the best way as possible. A client will not care as much how powerful your model is or how your architecture is being structured. What they care about is the accuracy of the information that you're delivering to them. And then what they also care about is latency at which you're delivering that information to them, right? They want to get things done in the right way, and they want it to be done quick. If you're not able to serve them that way, then you're losing. So make sure you get that, and then as you're doing all these different things that are serving them, make sure that there's a compounded effect, right? How does it serve best my customer if I do these three things very well and we're getting synergies out of all these features that are being tied together? On our end, for instance, we spent a lot of time making sure that you could get MEDDIC out of your conversations, right? All the information. Now, we want to make sure that your rep is adopting MEDDIC the right way. On top of the information that you're getting for your CRM, we want to be able to score how good that information is. Is it a 1 out of 3? Is it a 2 out of 3? Or is it a 3 out of 3 in terms of how much we dug into the pain identification side of things? And so that allows us to score the rep on their conversation and score the deal. And having these two together gives us a better outcome in the way you're viewing your attention account. Just think about the synergies and the compounded effects between all the features that you have.
There's something you said before that about you're only solving for pain that your customers are having.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, how do you can only have so many customer conversations in a day, and you also have to run the company. So I'm curious, how do you go about identifying these pains? What does that process look like at Attention?
Yeah, so I'm on almost every single Slack channel with our clients. So I can see everything that they send us in terms of requests or in terms of feedback. Every now and then, my co-founder Matthias and myself will jump on calls with some VP sales who we value and respect a lot. We'll run some discovery questions with them and try to understand what challenges they currently have. We have some clients even that are able to tweak or hack our product together for their own use. I was mentioning the scorecards earlier. The way that came through was one of our clients, Austin Myers, VP of Revenue over at Certificial, told me, hey, I've been using one of your features, the insights, by trying to get scores out of conversations. I was like, interesting, can you show me? And then he shows me what he's been doing. And then he also showed us his framework for scoring calls. I was like, this is great. Actually, we can build you a feature that would do that for you. Would that be useful? He was like, that would be huge, right? And that guy was very much living in the future, was trying to hack things together. He had that experimental thinking. And so we saved him in the category of users that we just continuously go back to whenever we try to build new features. And you always have, so you'll have like 10% of your power users who will kind of live in the future and provide you great ideas in terms of, building things that users want.
Last question before we wrap this. The show's called Learnings at Scale.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, what are you trying to learn right now? Is there anything that comes to mind that you're focused on figuring out?
Yeah, I think I'm always trying to upgrade and up level in everything that I do. I was very much into growth hacking, and now that I'm actually bringing in the head of growth, I'm trying to up level to something else that I should be doing better as a CEO, right? One of those will include maybe how do you make sure that you operationalize things better, how you have a better ops structure across the team so that you can scale better. How do you manage your teams better? How do you identify better talent? And how do you start scaling an org, right? And those were things that I wasn't really focused on because we were doing a lot of things that didn't scale, but now how do we prepare for scale better? And there's a lot of ops thinking behind things, a lot of identifying the right talent, and a lot of just management overall, right? People get motivated by different things. How do you make sure that you lay out the right incentives and the right structures to make everyone feel valued and successful in the org that you're building?
Well, Anis, thank you so much for joining us on our kind of maiden world tour here. Where can people find you?
Just add me on LinkedIn.
Add you on LinkedIn?
Yeah.
Nice. Sweet. Well, this has been fun.